My clock just told me it's 6 o'clock on the nose, so we're going to get started. Looks like everybody's here. Welcome to the regular City of Delray Oaks City Council meeting. Today is Tuesday, January 25th, 2022. Happy New Year, everyone, at 6 p.m. Karen, could you please do a roll call?
Councilmember Shirley.
Here.
Councilmember Donaldson.
Here.
Councilmember Gagliotti.
Here.
Vice Mayor Lintel.
Here.
Mayor Kerr.
Here. Louise, could you start us out with the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
Pledge allegiance to
Allegiance.
the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And it's our honor this evening. Did I lose him? Nope, there he is. To have Rabbi Bruce Greenbaum from the Congregation Beth Israel in Carmel. Turn it over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Let's begin with the moment of prayer. Creator and sustainer of all, we join together before you this day in all the gifts you have provided. We begin with praise for you, for giving us this very day. We are blessed to live in such a wondrous location here on the Monterey, where we can join together in caring for one another. May each of us recognize the divine spark you've implanted within us and within every human being. May we use the best of our religious traditions and the values found within each of us to ignite our sparks to bring enlightenment to your world. Let us be thankful for our Delray Oaks leaders who are dedicated to making this community healthy and filled with blessings for all who live here. Using that divine spark, let us recognize what each of us is capable of performing. No matter what our title or position, let us remain dedicated to helping all those around us. Please help us to understand that we are capable of creating in Delray Oaks a fabulous community for all. Oh God, inspire us to use these many gifts which with you have blessed us to make our world healthier and safer. Each day is created with endless possibilities and new beginnings. Let us celebrate each moment by reaching out to those in need and helping them. You guide each of us as we actively participate as part of your wondrous creation this evening and every day. Amen.
Thank you for joining us this evening. And let's move on. It's time for public comments. General public comment must deal with matters subject to the jurisdiction of the city and the council that are not on tonight's agenda. Anyone wishing to address the city council on matters not appearing on the agenda may do so now. The public may comment on any other matter listed on the agenda at the time that matter is being considered. There will be a time limit of no more than 3 minutes for each speaker. No action will be taken on matters brought up under this item, and all comments will be referred to staff. Mr. Clark.
The subject is our correspondence with the Monterey Regional Airport District. One finds it very interesting that back at the August City Council meeting, the letter was included on the agenda, and there was both council and public discussion and transparency about the mayor's request in that letter. In it, the city requested, quote, a consistent and open avenue of communications, end quote, and saying how we would, quote, gladly partner with the airport district, end quote, and how we were, quote, working on improved communication, end quote. And again, this was a full agenda item. And yet, when the response letter arrived in late September, it was buried under correspondence in the 10/26 meeting, not an agenda item. No equal amount of CC time was spent transparently discussing it. So here are a few of the highlights of that response so that we all understand what happens when you mount a complete campaign of no road DRO and eviscerate the previous city manager, mayor, and council people for having those exact open and clear and good neighbor discussions. I read from the airport's response from Mr. Curcio, the chairman of the airport board of directors. He comments, "The DRO letter writer had not done her homework. It was incorrect in thinking she could force an FCC roundtable, as the roundtable was for airports operated by a city, county with municipal layers. To the contrary, quote, MPAD is a standalone public agency with separately elected board members, end quote. It continues, residents have direct access to board and employees, end quote, as the No Road DRO participants are well aware. Mr. Curcio goes on to say that this direct communication from the public, quote, without any information being filtered through various parties, is the best way for their board to make informed decisions. And clearly he was referring to Mayor Kerr and Supervisor Askew, the two people that had written letters, as those filtering parties. He then goes on to talk about the accomplishments of the previous committee of which DRO participated, the relocation of the RV storage, quote, other ideas which would have positively impacted DRO citizens in a direct way, such as the purchase and set aside of property, end quote, as permanent open space. Mr. Curcio closes addressing the mayor with this, quote, given your prior comments denigrating the work of that committee, I did not believe that DRO would be interested in participating again. Mayor, one finds it very interesting that when you didn't get the response you wanted from the problem you clearly created, that this didn't make the agenda and transparency seems to have been thrown to the wind. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Now we can.
Okay, sorry. Thank you, Jim. Mr. Krieger.
I'll be brief. I just feel compelled yet again to just remind everybody that the previous city manager and most of the previous city council was holding these discussions with the airport about building the road without any public hearing. And we have the record, we have the emails, we have the money they spent to try to get everything in place so we could build the road, change the plan, all this without not one council meeting. So I just always feel compelled that there was not any open discussion going on before. It was all being done between the city manager, some unnamed city council members. We're not sure how many, so we don't know if there was a Brown Act violation or not, but it was certainly plural, so it was at least 2. All this is going on completely without any discussion being brought up, talking about building the road. None of that ever happened at a council meeting. So just as a reminder, there was not any open communication going on before. And I applaud your efforts to try and get the roundtable, a forum where we could have some discussion, and hopefully the airport will come around and want to have that at some point in time, because this impacts not just Delray Oaks, but also Monterey, the lawsuit that's going on between Monterey and the airport. So there's a lot of moving pieces here, and the best way to move forward is for us all to sit down and talk, and hopefully that will happen at some point. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comments? Karen, are you seeing any?
I'm not
Okay.
seeing any, Mayor.
So we're going to close public comments and we're going to move on to the vice mayor transition. So a year ago, we decided that rather than having one vice mayor for a long period of time, that we wanted to rotate it. And I want to thank Pat for taking on the first year. And so on that, I'd like to see if anyone has any comments for Pat before we turn it over to Mr. Gagliotti. Yes.
I do have comments. At this meeting, as well as the special meeting 2 weeks ago, you requested my assignments to be modified. And I knew nothing about this until I read, in both cases, I read it in the packet. In the future, when you're modifying council members' assignments, it would be courteous to let them know let that person know in advance what you are doing. It would show a better image for you as well as for the city of Delray Oaks. Thank you.
So we did determine that it was a typographical error last month, and this month was a regular rotation. But I agree. I think from here forward, in January, there will be a rotation of the vice mayorship. That was how it was set up. And so again, I thank you for your service.
You're welcome. But I don't understand a typographical error when it's replacing one person with another.
We changed it in the consent agenda when we voted. It was an error. Your names were flipped on the document and we corrected it. We didn't shift your position. There was no intent to shift your position.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Louise.
Yeah, I just want to thank Pat. I know she's going to continue to serve us very well on the board, on the council, but taking on the extra responsibilities as vice mayor is greatly appreciated. Thank her very much for her service.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Louise. Any council member have any comments?
Yeah, I'd like to thank Pat for stepping up. I mean, she's like the Energizer Bunny. I mean, she just has so much energy, and so I appreciate this position. I appreciate the opportunity to serve the city I grew up in as vice mayor, and I feel as though I have some large shoes to fill. So thank you, Pat, for your service. I think that was a nice way to put it.
Thank you, John.
I'll just second that. Thank you, Pat, for being our vice mayor for this past year. And yeah, thank you, and welcome to John to this position.
Thank you, Kim.
Yeah, I'd also like to echo all the comments. And Pat, not just for your service as vice mayor, for your service throughout the many, many years to Delray Oaks. Thank you for everything you've done. And John, congratulations.
Thank you, Scott. And congratulations to you, John. I know you'll do a good job.
So let's go out to the public. Any public comment other than Louise? Sorry about that. Okay, we'll bring it back to the council. So
Mayor, if I might,
Yes,
if
please.
there's no other public comment,
Sure.
just on behalf of the staff, Pat, we really appreciate your service and how kind you are to staff and helping out. And Council Member Gagliotti, Pat would bring breakfast to the staff every Friday. So,
Yeah, I knew there was something in there. Yeah.
so just so you know, expectations are high.
Yeah, well, hopefully my raise is going to be able to cover that.
Okay, so John, welcome. Pat, thank you. And let's move on to our next presentation. So on that, we're going to be hearing from the Police Advisory Committee update, and Chair Paul Keene is with us. I'd like to turn it over to you, sir.
Thank you, Mayor. I was asked to give a presentation for the committee on our progress. The committee is formed of 7 individuals appointed by the city council, mayor, and city manager. And we still have the 7 original members. 4 of those have previous public safety service and are familiar with law enforcement and how it works with the community. So that's helpful. The other 3 members have some related experience with public safety and are all contributors to our meetings. We got off to a slow start due to COVID, we didn't have our first meeting until April of 2021. And we had one in April and May, we had Zoom meetings. And then in July, we started having in-person meetings at the old town hall. And we've progressed quite well with the in-person meetings. The Zoom meetings kind of got us up to speed on some of the requirements that the police department has to comply with, both state and federal laws on reporting and how those reports are to be submitted. Commander Berkwin was acting chief during that time, and he was very good at getting that information to us, explaining how it works and how they plan on complying. Once the COVID restrictions lessen here in hopefully February, middle of February, we plan on having another in-person meeting and start getting in compliance with the 8-hour ride-along program that's requested under the guidelines for the committee, and then getting a tour of the police department in Delray Oaks and also over at the airport, and start meeting some of the officers and seeing how they work with the community. And I think the ride-along program for each of our members, that'll be very helpful to see what the actual nuts and bolts of how things work with the police department. It's a small agency. Everybody that has the law enforcement experience or public safety comes from much larger operations. So seeing how a small agency complies and works will be a learning experience for each of us. Commander Berkwin has been providing a lot of information to us, and my phone's ringing, but he's provided a lot of information to us about Leftus, which is a new software program, and that will help interact with the reporting requirements. The most important thing that we've worked on for the past 2 meetings that we've had is the portable data terminals for the police cars. There's been a lot of work done by Commander Berkwin and Chief Hoying, and they've done a lot of requests for bids on the property or on the equipment and installation. The installation's quite expensive, and once they've got it fine-tuned pretty good how it will interact and work with the agency, it's something that is needed. It will keep our patrolmen out on the street and instead of having to be in the office, which is because of the staff level of your agency and the amount of people you have. It's important to have them on the street and not in the office. At the present time, when they want to do certain work on the computer terminals, they have to go into the office to accomplish that. These portable data terminals, they'll get 2 of them, or the request is going to be for 2. That will keep the officers out on the street and available for service calls and response to emergency situations. The portable data terminals, they had different bids on those, and I believe Commander Berkwin's done a really good job on getting the best prices and service for the city. And the committee, all 7 are 100% behind it and would recommend that the city make a purchase of at least 2 and have them installed in the units. That's pretty much the update I have for you, Mayor.
Thanks, Paul. Can you just share with the council your background? please.
Well, I started out, actually, when we started talking about these ported data terminals, when I started out, we didn't have portable radios. We only had radios in the cars. So it's been a huge advance. I started at the sheriff's office here in Monterey County. And actually back then, I went on patrol before I even went to post school and worked, almost a year. And then I had to do a tour in the jail. That was the old county jail that's downtown on Alisal Street. I was actually working in the jail when Cesar Chavez was incarcerated there. And let's see, he had quite a few visitors, and we had a pretty good crowd to manage during that time. And then I came back out of the jail and worked patrol for a few years, and then became an investigator, worked in the investigations division, and went to the district attorney's office as a criminal investigator for 10 years, and then retired. And I currently work as a private investigator.
Thanks. Sounds like we have some good experience on the committee, and I'm glad. So what I'd like to do is see if there are any questions from the council. Let's start with Vice Mayor Gagliotti.
No, I'm very familiar with Mr. Keene. I was his paper boy for a number of years, and I've followed his career and his endeavors. So I'm very, very excited that he's got this position, and it definitely seems like we're in good hands.
Great. Ms. Lintel.
Yes, thank you, Paul, for a complete update. It's always nice to know what's going on, and I'm glad that you think so highly of our police department based on your past experience. And thank you for serving Delray Oaks.
Mr. Donald. Oops. I'm sorry, Paul.
I'm happy to have been a resident here. Actually, when I first came to the peninsula in 1965, I lived in Delray Oaks for about a year with my aunt and uncle who lived up on Quindale, and then moved away. And then once I got married, my wife and I bought our house in, 74, and didn't know how we were going to make the payments on a $54,000 mortgage.
Mr. Donaldson.
Yeah, Paul, thank you for the update. Really appreciate it. And thank you for volunteering your time to be on the committee. And I know it's been a challenge for you all during COVID, just like everyone else, but thanks to the entire committee for trying to fight through that and, working through it during this tough time. So really appreciate what you're doing and what the rest of the committee is doing.
Thank you.
Ms. Shirley.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. It's nice to get an update. And for those of you, Luis, Jim, Frederica, who are also on the committee, thank you for your time and effort in this. Paul, I had a question. In terms of the committee, I know it's stated that you're supposed to advise and collaborate. Can you talk to me a little bit more about how the committee does that, in terms of collaboration or advising? How does that sort of work back and forth between the police and your committee?
Well, the way it's set up and what we were given as the guidelines when the committee was formed is the police chief sets the agenda for us. And then we all work together on a date and time for the meetings, but the agenda, it comes from the police chief. Chris Bergman has been the one that's pretty much been organizing that. But once we meet, then we have discussions and different topics come up, and we make different suggestions on what we want to work on. And it's hard once we see the police department and start seeing some interaction. I think it'll be a little easier for us to pick and choose on things to advise on. But for the most part, these ported data terminals are really important.
Okay, great. And I know I've talked to our city manager about this, but just the terms of the Brown Act, in terms of having your meetings have agendas and that are published and that you have an open meeting. I'd like to, I hope that we can move forward with that. Because I think, you know, you all provide a very valuable service, and I think our community probably doesn't even know what's happening, or doesn't even know to come to your committee members if they have, you know, something they'd like you to bring up at the advisory team. So I'd like it if you could be more public with what you're doing as you move forward. So is there anything that you think, you know, going forward this next year that you feel like your committee would like to accomplish?
Well, once we start seeing a little more, we have been updated on staffing and what the goal of the police department is, starting in 2017 when they started building, rebuilding the police agency. That was something that was drawn up, the guidelines, and then they've been updated by Chief Hoying, and we've looked at those, and I think we would have some recommendations on staffing. And personally myself, right now you're at 11 full-time sworn officers, and that is difficult. That's the bare minimum that you can have. You're never going to be at full staff at 11. And if it were up to me, I know it's going to cost money. I'd say you need 2 more positions so you can be at that bare minimum 11. So that's something we would want to look into, and we might make some recommendations. I know you don't want to hear, oh, more money for more police agencies, your most expensive employees, but it is something you need. You're at 11, you're at minimum. You're at minimum coverage at 11, and you're never going to be 100% with your training. You have people that are going to be on vacation, they're going to sick, whatever reason, you're never going to be maximum 11.
Well, I appreciate that input. So I'm glad you're speaking up about that, and I'd be happy to hear that moving forward. So thanks again for your work.
Okay.
I too want to thank the entire committee. I know it's been rough. I took a ride along before COVID, and I can't tell you how highly I recommend it. Just learning about how our police look at things and how they traverse the city and hot spots and things like that. I hope that can happen, you know, soon. So it sounds like you guys can dig deeper into the work you're doing. So is there an avenue for committee members to add items of interest to the agenda?
Well, not the agenda itself. The way you have it set up is the agenda's run by the chief.
Mm-hmm.
But we've been allowed to say, we want to talk about this or we want to talk about that. And that comes up in the meetings. And we've actually, well, we have had some written things beforehand that have been sent to the members by email for us to look over so we can be prepared to talk about whatever is going to come up during the meeting. And then the other members have discussed things that they would like to see. We have one active member that is public safety fire department in Santa Clara, and I think he will have a lot of good input because he's going to be up to date on everything that's going on. A much larger county, he sees all the bells and whistles of anything new coming for public safety.
Great. And let me think. So I Ms. Shirley asked a little bit, but do you have any upcoming projects that the committee is wanting to dig into? Like speeding? something like that? Or is it simply about advising the police on how they do their job?
Well, how they do their job. Right now, we've just discussed things concerning what the requirements are for each officer when they have contact with somebody from the public, how they have to fill out certain forms and checklists, things. Then if they arrest somebody, there's more work. It's not just the report, but they have to check off a lot of things concerning that person that was arrested and what the circumstances were, different things that could have happened during that arrest that might be important. It's the input for the federal government and the state. So they have a lot to do. Just it's added on top of the actual patrol work or the actual police work, enforcement. And then you have all this calls for service that don't even involve a criminal situation. They have a lot to do, and we're still getting up to speed with how that interacts with their actual work, their report writing and record keeping. And once we do that right along, I think we'll have a lot more ideas on what we can recommend from our experiences.
Great. Well, thank you again for the work you're doing, and I hope you guys are able to do it on a more regular basis in a safe manner. So thank you very much.
I think it'll work out. We've got a good group of people, and we're all getting along.
Good. Mr. Borquin, would you like
I would
say something?
Yeah, it's been a pleasure to work with the committee. Although we do normally provide an agenda, we always have a roundtable, especially at the end of the meeting, where people can discuss whatever they want, and those include things that their neighbors tell them or whatever it may be that we need to know about, things that could make it on the next agenda. So I know that a more formal meeting is being discussed by council tonight in some way. I hope it allows us for the ability to really talk openly with each other in the meetings. It doesn't stifle us in some way. We would love to have people show up to our meetings, and that certainly would not be an issue. I know that you guys have a hard job. You're going to have to think about this and what's best for the city and all. I really do enjoy working with them. And going forward, like Paul said, if we could get some in-person time, folks in the cars, some tours, it would be great. We had this big plan, and then COVID came along and kind of squished it a little bit. But we do have some stuff set aside, some training on records keeping and evidence and all kinds of things to do. We just need a safe place to do it, safe time to do it. Well, I just wanted to tell Paul that I very much appreciate his leadership.
And aren't there new policing laws that were just passed January 1 in the state of California?
Well, yeah, there's always new policing laws. I'm not sure which ones you're referring to, but there's always stuff, new stuff happening and new stuff being talked about happening in the future. So yeah, we got to keep up on all that. We very much do.
And thank you for your leadership as well.
Thanks,
So,
ma'am.
let's go to the public. Any comments? Okay, seeing none, I'll bring Mr. Clark. You're muted.
There we go. Well, as a member of that committee and having been at a couple of the meetings, I can tell you that it's so trying to find whatever that perfect center is, because there's so much happening that's demanding more reporting and more accountability and this and that of the police department. The funny thing is, the effect of that is this paperwork is forcing them to stay in the office. And when a call comes in, they're not out in the field where they should be. And so it's just going to be interesting as I sit on this committee and see what's going on, how the chief and his crew find a balance for that. And one of those helps is this new equipment that I was fortunate to talk with Chief about, since that is my thing, the computers that they're getting for their car. And that will help. But, you know, there comes a point where you put so much paperwork in front of a person that you keep them from doing the job they're supposed to be doing. And it's sad to see that that's happening. And hopefully they'll get a better balance at some point in the future. That's all.
Thank you. Excuse me. Any other comments? All right, I'll bring it back to the council. Any last comments before we let Paul go? All right, on that, Paul, thank you again for your leadership, and I look forward to another update soon.
Okay, thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, sir. All right, now we're going to move on to the Brown Act and Ethics Review, and I'm going to turn it over to City Attorney Lorca.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Mayor and council members and staff. Randy, if you could pull up the presentation, I would appreciate it. There it is. So tonight I'm going to be talking at the city manager's request, just high level about the Brown Act and conflicts of interests. I want to be clear that this is not an AB 1234 training. That's the 2-hour full-blown one. But I look forward to doing it when we're all back in person. I don't wish a 2-hour training on anybody over Zoom, but it's a fun one. It's interactive, and I look forward to doing it again for the city. That being said, I will, as I promised and I think delivered to the Planning Commission, to keep it under 2 hours for you folks tonight. I'll try. Randy, next slide, please. There we go. So the Brown Act's general rule is, as we're all familiar with, is that your meetings need to be open in public, and that all of the public has a place on the agenda, most notably public comment, either the general or on specific items. This is the quote: all meetings of a legislative body of a local agency shall be open in public, and all persons shall be permitted to attend any meeting of the legislative body of a local agency except as otherwise provided in this chapter, and we'll get to that. So that's the general premise there. Before the Brown Act, I think there was a lot of sort of things happening outside of the public view. Next slide, please, Randy. So when we talk about the Brown Act, it covers the meetings of a legislative body of a local agency. And for our purposes, that's you, that's the city council. It's also commissions and committees of the city. So the Planning Commission, the Finance Committee, and we'll get into some specifics there with respect to standing committees. But it's you folks, the city council. Next slide, please, Randy. And we'll talk about the distinction between committees. And there's sort of two. There's a standing committee, and then there's sort of ad hoc committees. Standing committees are those that have continuing subject matter jurisdiction over something in the city, or those that are fixed by charter, ordinance, or resolution. So for instance, our city code calls for 4 of them: Finance Committee, Police Advisory Committee, I think Park and Recs Committee. And those are subject to the Brown Act. Contrast that with what we had a few months ago with the city manager hiring process. I believe there's a temporary ad hoc committee to sort of help get the ball rolling and work with the consultant, and then bring back to the broader group that information. So those are the two committees. You always have to look very carefully to see, where that falls. And there are a lot of jurisdictions, even if it's an ad hoc committee, just decide to make it a Brown Act, and there's no prohibition on doing that. Next slide, Randy, please. And who's covered by the Brown Act? Of course, members of the city council, those that are on committees and commissions that are subject to the Brown Act. The trick here is, if you're a newly elected council member who's not yet assumed office, you are, even before you're sworn in, subject to the Brown Act. Next slide, Randy, we'll talk about meetings. So those who's covered. What is a meeting? A meeting is a majority of the members. And the definition is, you'll notice, is at the same time, location to hear, discuss, or deliberate or take action on city business, essentially. Notice that it doesn't say, noticed meetings. It can be, at the Safeway, if two are shopping and one comes along and goes, boy, the tax revenue from this, the fact, well, we ought to do this, we ought to do that. So it doesn't have to be there. And again, this is where appearances are so important. You never know what citizen is watching and thinking maybe, can't control what they're thinking. So that's the meeting. Next slide, Randy. One of the things we have to look out for with meetings are serial meetings. So obviously, if there's a majority in one place at one time, that's something to look out for. But there's also sort of serial meetings, and that comes in two flavors. The daisy chain meeting, where one council member calls the other and just says, I talked to A, and they're on board, and C, what do you think? And okay, that's great. That can't be done. Or the hub and spoke, where you're using one person to sort of relay information, and there's that. You got to look out for the feedback loop to the other members. So that's sort of the reply all. Social media is something to watch out for, but it's those are the two flavors of a serial meeting. That's usually where trouble occurs. I think everyone's sort of on it enough to gather in a parking lot after meeting and continue discussing things, but that's sort of that's always a red flag. If you would go to the next slide, Randy, please. So there are circumstances in which you folks may be together and it's not a meeting. And that is to talk to other folks, your constituents, or one other council member, as long as the third is not brought in. You have the ability to work with the city manager, and the city manager can talk to you all about different issues. As long as the feedback loop doesn't happen, that's okay. And there's case law that specifically says, look, using the city manager, calling with questions, let's say 4 of you call with a question about an agenda item before the meeting. As long as the feedback doesn't happen to the council members, we're okay. And the other big one is sort of other venues. So conferences, community meetings of, let's say, the airport, social ceremonial things, standing committee meetings, as long as there's not discussion about city business there. So to go and to speak as a member of the public, but not, again, you got to watch out for the sort of hallway conversations, and then grand jury hearings. Next slide, Randy, please. So the law catching up with technology, that's usually the way it goes. There's a few new laws with respect to social media that apply regardless of whether there's a majority of legislative body. And I'm just going to read them to you. They're pretty new. I don't know if folks have seen this before, and I hate to sort of read slides, and I think I could promise this is the only one I'll do it on. But members of a legislative body do not engage in a serial meeting by posting on social media about matters within the body's subject matter jurisdiction, even if the other members can see the post. So if you say, DRO should do X, Y, Z if other people are on there looking, that's not a violation. But what you're prohibited from doing is interacting with a communication made, posted, or shared by another member about a matter. So likes, emojis, thumbs up, all that type of stuff. That's I think the target of this new law, which took effect at the beginning of last year. Next, we'll talk about the types of meetings. Randy, if you would. So you're all familiar with our fourth Tuesday of the month. That's set by our municipal code. Anything that's not that is a special meeting, which is something that we can and do with somewhat regularity. And the other one is an emergency meeting where there's truly something crippling going on. Labor strikes, natural disasters. And that boils down to public health and safety. You can get together and meet for that type of thing. And we'll talk about some of the noticing requirements coming up. The next slide talks about attending meetings. Randy, if you'd go to the next one, just a quick little sideline because of COVID. Generally, for those of you who have traveled and you're somewhere in Southern California and you're posting the agenda in the lobby and you're saying, you want to come to room 204 and make a public comment, you've got to do that at each and every location. It's got to be accessible to the public. During COVID, you must allow public participation, but there's some differences here, and that's that wherever you're participating from doesn't have to be accessible to the public. You all can keep your front doors closed. You don't have to post the agenda where you are, and the majority of a quorum does not need to physically be within the territorial jurisdiction of the city. So that's kind of, for the time being, the COVID rules. Next slide, Randy, and we'll get back to sort of agendas here. I think you all are familiar, 72 hours, the agenda has to be posted. Sometimes staff will get you things, the packet a little bit later, that's okay, as long as the agenda is posted. Special meetings, 24-hour notice, emergency meetings, if media is requested it, you got to give them an hour, but otherwise you sort of get into chambers and get things done in a true emergency. As we talked about, posting, it's got to happen at City Hall, on the website. If the city has a website, staff does a fabulous job of always making sure that happens. And then the notice content, it's got to give a brief and general description of what's to be discussed. Sometimes you see, well, we'll discuss, resolution 2805. But it doesn't tell us anything. You've got to give a little bit of a descriptor there. So if you're someone, a member of the public, and want to participate, hey, I better go down there and see what's going on. Next slide, Randy, please. Anything outside of agenda can't be discussed. Sometimes there's the ability to put something on if 2/3 of the body determine there's sort of need for immediate action and you learned about it after the agenda was posted. Continued items from a meeting held not more than 5 days earlier. I know the city's practice is, no matter what, always just to publish. And there's the ability to do a few things: respond to comments, direct staff, request more information, ask a question for clarification, make a brief report or an announcement. If you want to see me sweat, you'll tune in when someone from the public makes a comment and one council member says, we really ought to do that. Can we get more information? And then the second one says, yeah, that's true, and then the third, and I'm going, oh my God, so quick, brief clarifiers. I think, that's allowed, as long as that doesn't turn into, full-blown discussion of something that wasn't on the agenda. Next slide, Randy. Public's role in our meetings, as you know, they have the right to address you folks before the action is taken, and maybe sometimes you feel otherwise, but there's the right to criticize and critique and do all that kind of stuff, and that's what you get paid the big salaries for, as John Gagliotti mentioned earlier. Other rights, next slide, Randy. This is one, sometimes people will stop a meeting and say, can you give us your name or where you live? And most of the time people don't mind, but I have attended plenty of meetings where they go by, a different handle and they just refer to themselves as something else, and they don't provide it, and they don't have to provide it. The right to record, as long as it's not disruptive to the meeting, right to the materials at the meeting, and ADA compliance is an absolute requirement. So if the elevator is not working and the meeting's on the second floor, fix the elevator or reconvene the meeting at a later date, as an example. Next slide. Randy, I'm still seeing the previous ones there. Maybe it's just me.
Alex.
Oh, there. Oh,
we see the rights of the legislative body.
Yeah, we've got okay. I sort of spoke to that. Prohibiting comments outside of the boundaries of jurisdiction. So if you go down there and it just has absolutely nothing to do with the city, and sometimes that's that's a fine line. Someone's criticizing a council person for something in their private, lives, which we've seen in other jurisdictions recently, or what's going on in other parts of the state. Usually it's a pretty broad standard. If, folks can just say, it's a national thing, but has local implications, you're kind of there. And then of course you can prohibit disruptive conduct. And during the full AB 1234 presentation, I get into examples of that and what you might do if there's disruptive conduct. Okay, Randy, thank you for that. Sorry about that. Closed session you're all familiar with. So this is actually an exemption to the open meeting law, and it's very common sense. It's just where privacy sort of outweighs the policy in favor of open meetings, and that's, you know, litigation, personnel matters, obviously, those are private matters. Employees can at times have those discussed publicly, but every employee has a right to personally be to have, you know, adverse employment actions against them, compensation, salary, labor negotiations, property negotiations, security threats, and public safety. So very common sense exemptions to the open meeting requirement. The next slide, Randy, talks about sort of the duties of confidentiality. Sometimes, you know, folks want to talk about what happened in closed session. Technically, it's all five that hold the right to that, and only if a majority of the majority votes to make it public or talk about it can they do that. Same thing with discussions with me, attorney-client privilege. If one member of the council wants to discuss that, it's not enough. We have to have a majority of the body, because it's the body itself that's the client and holds the privilege, and that's how that shakes out. Next slide, Randy, please. Civil enforcement of the Brown Act. The law is relatively reasonable here. The DA, interested person, can bring that. Usually what happens is there's a letter, you know, it happened at a local district recently, where someone says, hey, you did this outside bounds, and the law gives some flexibility there and realizes, you know, we're all human beings. So if there's substantial compliance, and more importantly, there's a cure and correct period, meaning if there was a Brown Act violation, you can go back in 30 days and do it over. Doing so is not admissible in court that you did something wrong. Again, the law wants to encourage and favor people to do the right thing. So it can't be construed as an admission. Or the body may say, no, you know, we don't agree that there was a violation there, and they can just proceed. So there's some flexibility there, and if a mistake is made, as long as it's not intentional, there's usually some recourse there that's reasonable. Next slide, Randy. And criminal enforcement, but there's got to be intent there, and that's got to be proven by the DA's office who's bringing it. So these are obviously things that we don't worry about, but they're out there and it's part of the training. So I thought I would mention it. The next slide, Randy, is conflicts of interest. Now, ethics is a little bit broader in the full 2-hour presentation, but the conflicts of interest is something I was asked to sort of present on specifically under the Political Reform Act, which is the government code at 87-100 et sec. And that's simply that you folks and all public officials have to disclose conflicts of interest and can't make decisions or participate in decisions in which you have a conflict. And the FPPC used to be in the old days an 8-step, now it's a 4-step process, and it's really complicated and really complex. So we're going to go through the highlights briefly, but really early and often consulting with the city attorney's office, it's very complex. There's exceptions to the exceptions, and so forth. So we'll do the high level review. And in the AB 1234, we'll definitely get into more detail on that. But for tonight, I thought it was just, you know, the goal to be, if you see something happening or just enough that a red flag, you know, rises in your mind, to reach out to me and talk about it. So the first step is, next slide, please, Randy, is the decision. Is it reasonably foreseeable that the decision will have a financial effect on any of your financial interests? And the rules here, they're presumed if you have a financial interest that's named a party or the subject of a decision. So if you have, you know, it's your business that's going to be in front of the city council, you're sort of presumed. Otherwise, it's reasonably foreseeable. It's a realistic possibility. It's not just hypothetical or theoretical. I have the gamut of these questions over my career, and it's sort of this: at what point is the attenuation enough that, you know, your mom's brother's so and so is, you know, going to be before the city council? And so again, rules and many exceptions. So that's the first question: is it going to have a financial effect? The next slide, Randy, please. The next one is it's going to be a material effect, and the law provides all kinds of standards for materiality, and I'll just read them brief. It's for business entities, for real property. You know, you people talk about the 500-foot rule. Frequently, you talk about business entities, $2,000, source of income, source of gifts. So you see here a few of the examples. Again, these are the foreseeability is really one of the more complex areas. So these are the sort of the areas in which the law provides standards for materiality. And by the way, if the answer to any of these questions is no, then you're sort of out of the decision tree, and the answer is there's not a conflict. So if it's not material, if it is material, next slide, Randy, please. The question becomes, is that material financial effect, does that apply to the public in general? So let's say that the waste hauler agreement has some sort of, personal effect on you. Well, everybody's going to be affected by the waste hauler agreement. So in those types of situations, you look for an effect on the public generally. Is it indistinguishable from the public in general? And again, here, the law provides for certain percentages, is it going to affect a certain percentages of everyone in the city? And if it does, therefore, it applies to the public in general. So if the answer to that is no, there's no conflict. But if the answer is yes, you go to the fourth step, Randy, please. And this is another important one. Is the public official participating in making, or in any way attempting to use their official position to influence the government decision? This is really broad. So I didn't put their making. I think that's, if you're making a decision, I'm there, city manager's there, and you're making decisions. Participating in a decision means providing information and opinion or recommendation for the purpose of affecting the decision. Influencing is very broad, contacting people in your agency or other agencies for the purpose of, sort of under the cloak of your authority to try and influence that decision. So maybe you're conflicted out, but you've gone over to another public agency and you're, talking to folks over there saying, you've got to do this and you've got to do that. So it's a really broad definition. There are exceptions to that. I think there's about 7 of them. One I put here that's fairly common is public speaking on a matter. So while you may be conflicted, if you're invited somewhere to speak sort of about it and you want to talk to the media about it, that's okay. Public speaking on a matter is okay, as long as you don't cross over to trying to influence things. So it's weird. You're sort of conflicted out from the formal process, but that just allows you to go out and scream it from the rooftops, as it were. It's something that comes up quite a bit because people are passionate about issues, and you want the public to know where you stand, and there's still the ability to do that even if you're conflicted out during meetings of your agency and other agencies. And next slide, Randy, please. So I always tell folks, you didn't do anything wrong, you didn't do anything bad, you're just conflicted. Just all you have to do is let people know before the discussion on the item, and you have to get up and leave the room unless you're, as we are now Zoom, it's mute and turn off your video. There's exceptions here too. There is, the example I have that I use all the time is an architect on the planning commission. You have to step down and from the dais, but you can speak to your fellow commissioners because you happen to be the architect on the project. Another one here that's common is if something's on the consent agenda, the rule is you don't have to get up and leave. You can just sort of, you can abstain from voting on the consent agenda or that item and go from there. So next slide is best practices. To wrap up, it's the regular training. Again, I look forward to being in person with you folks for the 2-hour training, and that's a real top to bottom one. And always feel free to contact me with questions. And I can't, state that enough. I can't thank you guys enough. You're so good about, hey, just, I was thinking about this, I was thinking about that. I really appreciate the time, before meeting to do the analysis and provide the advice. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Wonderful. Thank you, Alex.
Sure.
I asked for this because I think annually it's good not only for us to remember, but also for the public to understand when we may or may not be able to say something or why we leave, or things like that. So let's go out to the council. Let's start with, excuse me, Vice Mayor Gagliotti.
No, I don't have any questions.
Okay. Mr. Donaldson?
I have no questions, and Alex, thanks. Appreciate
Sure.
it. Not the most exciting topic in the world, but hey, appreciate the information.
Sure.
Ms. Shirley?
Yeah, thanks, Alex. I have a question. If we go to hybrid, how does that change in terms of noticing the public? Like if we're hybrid and I'm still at my house, do I have to at that point state where I'm at and post an agenda at my house? How does it change for hybrid?
We'd have to look to see what the state wants to do on that. So right now, under the emergency proclamation, we're able to do that. If it does go back, then we just go back. If it's hybrid, I would expect the state to say, look, for a hybrid meeting, here are the rules.
So those aren't stated yet?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Sure.
Ms. Lintel, sorry about that. I'm used to calling you first.
Thank you. I have no questions, but thank you, Alex, for the reminder.
You're welcome.
Right. They're not exciting, but they're important.
Mhm.
And they instill trust and transparency in our public servants. So on that, let's go to the public. Anybody have any questions, comments? Okay, I'll bring it back to the council. Any last comments for our attorney? Okay, not seeing any. Let's move on to the consent agenda. Does anyone in the public want to pull any item off of the consent agenda to discuss? I'm seeing no hands. Anybody on the council want to pull any item off the consent agenda?
I would like to pull A1.
Okay. Anybody else? I just have a comment on the Planning Commission and the PD, but let's start with Pat. Please tell us what's up.
Under the announcements and comments by planning commissioners, there's a comment that says Commissioner Ragsdale Cronin proposed the idea of fundraising for the new flagpole. I didn't know that we had voted on having a new flagpole. Maybe he should have said A rather than the. And that's my only comment.
Mr. Gerton, can we change that to A?
Yes, we can. Yeah.
Okay. I had something about the Planning Commission meetings. I would like to, until we have the new technology system, I would love to see the final minutes include the link for the video. That way everything is all wrapped up in one place. Is that possible?
That sounds possible. I just need to double check with Randy and make sure, and with Yavuz and make sure we can do that. But
Okay.
that sounds logical and reasonable. So I'm going to say yes for now.
Okay. And then I just had one comment. The police department activity log, is that for a calendar year or a fiscal year?
The chief can answer that, but that's for the calendar year, right, Jeff?
Yeah, it's the calendar year.
Great. Well, I just wanted everyone to make a special note that it appears we had 0 residential burglaries, 3 residential petty thefts, and 12 residential alarms during the entire year. I'm sure there's a couple of other nuances in there, but I encourage everyone to take a look at that and know that you can sleep well at night in Delray Oaks. So on that, John, do we need a motion for the to an A?
I think if you just make a motion to accept with the corrections as stated.
Okay, I'll entertain a motion.
I move that we approve the consent agenda with the modification regarding the flagpole.
I'll second.
Any comments, questions before we move on? Okay, Karen, can you do a roll call vote, please?
Councilmember Shirley,
Aye.
Councilmember Donaldson,
Aye.
Councilmember Lintel,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Gagliotti,
Aye.
Mayor Kerr.
Aye, so the consent agenda passes unanimously. We have no old business and we have a couple of new businesses. So item A is receive report on grant acquisition program. I think I'm turning this over to you, Mr. Gerton.
Yes, Mayor.
Okay.
So I'll try to be quick on all of these in the interest of time, but and people's interest. But the grant program is something that came out of our strategic planning workshop. It's part of the 6-month objectives that we came up with. I believe this was actually a holdover from the previous 6 months. And the intent was for staff to look at opportunities for growing our grant acquisition program and better positioning the city for researching and identifying appropriate grant projects and then applying for and receiving that funding. There's still work that needs to be done on that, but I didn't want to put this off anymore and have you all think that we're not working on this and that we're not looking at this. I think it's a good time for the discussion relative to some of our recent discussions as far as building some of the foundational strengths that we need in order to do some of these extracurriculars, not exactly the right word, but you understand what I mean by, things that are beyond the basic nuts and bolts of providing the services that we provide in the city. I started in my public service career as a grant manager, grant writer, grant acquisition coordinator for the city of Monterey. The reason that position was created in the city of Monterey at that time was similar to where I think we're going to be shortly. There was kind of a once every 20, 30 years opportunity specifically for park funding and road funding and water funding. And like most other jurisdictions, the city of Monterey bit off more than they could chew. And they went out and got every grant that was available as other cities realized they couldn't perform on the grant projects that they got into and started handing money back. City of Monterey jumped in with more projects to get those done. And after several years, found themselves in a situation where they had a ton of money, over $100 million in grant funding projects, and had accomplished none of them. So they were at risk of losing all of the money and their reputation and their ability to get more grants. So that's why my position was created. So what I like to tell people after 20 years of doing this is, when our parents and our grandparents used to tell us that there's no such thing as a free lunch, there's no such thing as a free lunch. And there's no such thing as free money when it comes to grant money. Grant money comes with a matching requirement, which either is direct funding that we need to identify to match the grant, or it's indirect funding, staff time. And then it's our ability to achieve the project goals and to implement the projects. And in a little jurisdiction like ours, that's a lot. That's a lot for us to bite off. So I'm talking with the chief, talking with Ron, with Karen, about how we do that going forward and what is our capacity as a small jurisdiction to go out and get some of this additional funding to provide more services to the community and to deal with some of the backlog of maintenance and capital improvement projects that we'd like to get done. But the reality is that most of the grants that we get are in Ron's realm, and Ron is an army of one. And so for every new administrative assignment that we give to Ron, such as a grant project to manage and implement, or a grant application to provide information for so that we can go out and get it, that's time that he's not out on the mower, or time that he's not out fixing a storm drain, or pruning trees, or dealing with trees that came down in the wind, stuff like that. So there's trade-offs for any additional work that we're going to do to go after grant funding like this. So back to our discussion from 2 weeks ago, I want to set us up so that we're strategic about how we're doing this. And a lot of that starts with things that we're working on, like putting together a 5-year capital improvement program. Having that helps us target our grant acquisition programs, because now we have projects before us and a plan for the next 5 years and a priority that you all have helped us set for what do you see as the needs of the city, and where would you like to put the efforts going forward? Because like I said, we have limited resources. So it's not that we don't have a grant program idea in mind. It's just that we're not there yet, because it's kind of putting the cart before the horse. If we don't have the foundational structure to support those grant programs and that grant acquisition effort. So this will be an ongoing discussion that we're going to have, especially as we go into budget development and start talking about what our vision is for the future and where we want to see the city get to, and start to identify some of our long range capital needs as well as wants. And that'll help us really kind of target our efforts on grant things, and not just going after every grant that comes across our desk. Because I have some real concern with the ability to perform on all of those things. And then beyond that, like I said, we're small, we have limited resources. There was a time pre-recession where cities were starting, like City of Monterey, starting to hire dedicated grant staff. That's what they did, is they got grants for projects and then managed those projects. And in my case, rode the engineers to make sure that they actually got their stuff done and didn't just sit around thinking about how they could fix the world, and actually fixed the world. That's expensive, and it's easy to think that a grant writer should pay for themselves. And in an indirect way, they do, because they bring in a lot of resources to the city. And if there's an ability to offset general fund money that you normally would have spent on a project with grant money, then that general fund money can pay for the grant writer. But it's pretty rare that a grant writer's time can be covered by grants. In fact, a lot of grants explicitly forbid that. So I don't think we're in a position yet. I don't know. I mean, I'm still learning the budget myself and formulating recommendations. But right now, I don't think we're in a position where we could afford to hire somebody on staff to help us with this effort. Hiring consultants is an opportunity. I've spoke with the mayor earlier today about some of the things I've seen and things that I've done in other agencies working with consultants. A lot of consultants that normally didn't used to do grant acquisition are getting into that, because that's an opportunity to help some of their clients do more projects, which then they can bid on. And so they get a direct effect from helping government get more projects on their catalog. So that's an option. I don't know if it's an option for us right now necessarily, but what I am pursuing with some of our neighboring jurisdictions is talking with some of the other city managers and public works directors, community development directors that I know, about the possibility of sharing a resource. And, if one of our larger sister cities was to hire staff or dedicate staff, if maybe we could pay a portion or pay for some of their services so that we could get some of the benefits of that. It's contrary to how cities normally think of grant acquisition programs, because it's by nature a competitive endeavor. I think for the most part, we're not competing with most of our surrounding cities. They're far greater need and far greater opportunities than we do. So I don't think they necessarily see us as a competitor. So I'm hopeful that there might be some opportunity with that. And then I'll update you if that bears any fruit. But other than that, right now, this is, like I said, this is going to be part of the ongoing process of building our stable of services and how we provide those services. And we'll be talking more about this as we get into budget development over the next few months. But I just wanted you all to know that this is on our list of projects to accomplish, and it's an ongoing process. And so we'll keep it on the strategic plan. So with that, I'm available for any questions.
Thanks, John. Let's start with Vice Mayor Gagliotti.
No, I'll be curious to I guess flesh out what we might think some of our capital improvement projects might be. And I totally appreciate your experience in maybe tempering some of the enthusiasm, and just because that was actually one of the interview questions when we hired you, was like, hey, look, we've got some ideas and we know that you've written grants and it was in your resume and we want to go forward and get some grants. It's I think we still want to do that, but we want to do that with the experience that you basically just that you laid out. So I appreciate this report, but I am anxious to kind of start fleshing out capital improvement projects.
And I'm eager to get in and do some of that work that I know you all were excited about. But like I said, I want to be strategic about it because there's a lot of expectations on me and what I do for the city and what I do for all of you. So I just want to make sure that we have a prioritization because I am just one person.
Appreciate that. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
Ms. Lintel.
I'd just like to thank you, John, City Manager, for the nice update that you gave us on what's going on with grants and all. And I have no questions. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Donaldson.
Yeah, I also appreciate the information. And this is one of those areas that the city's very blessed to have a city manager that's very knowledgeable in this particular area. And I really appreciate the strategic approach that you're taking towards it. I don't think it makes sense to have someone in-house for all of the reasons that you stated, but maybe there's a possible combination of sharing the services with another city and using consulting services, because oftentimes cities are going after similar grants. And if there is another city that's doing that, it does make sense to kind of piggyback off of that. But if it's something that, specific to Delray Oaks, then using that consultant is probably the most, the approach that we would probably want to take. So that's my input. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Shirley.
Yeah, thanks, John, for that update. It's always good to hear kind of what's going on in your mind and what direction you're taking. So thanks for sharing. And I know as we look at our finances and we look at what services we're contracting out and sort of evaluating our budget, whether that would equate to just more in-house staff. I know we're staff limited. And so handling the grants that we do get would be far easier if we actually had the staff to do that. I realize that. So I understand sort of the push and pull that you've got there. So I appreciate your approach, and and being creative with it is great. So I hope there are some things on the horizon, but yeah, planning for it is a good idea. Thanks.
So I agree with all the comments. I appreciate the methodical approach to this. I'm really looking forward to having a shovel-ready kind of list of projects that we've all identified. It seems as though grants kind of float before us, and it's this mad dash to see what applies. So I'm looking forward to the capital improvement project process, and I hope that that starts soon so we can start implementing things into our next year's budget. I am also, there's a couple of things that come to mind. One is, we do have one-time funds. We're looking at allocating this year's funds, ARPA funds, but next year we'll have another 200,000. I'm not suggesting hiring somebody long-term, but we do have a little flexibility right now with a pot of money that that we won't have going forward. The other thing is I'll start floating this idea with the mayors and looking for collaborative opportunities as well. Maybe there's an opportunity to partner on something. And to partner with Seaside, who is an underrepresented community, which will help our odds for a grant. We have more in common than we don't. So I'm looking forward to figuring out what those are. And I think there's creative, ideas out there with grant writing associations and things like that that may be able to help, at least up front. But I realize we're limited, and we're in ironically a moment of plenty, with all the federal infrastructure money coming down and things like that. I want to make sure that we can take advantage of as many as possible within the limited personnel and time, frankly, that we have. So that's kind of all I had. I don't really, John, can you tell us a little bit about the process to create a 5-year CIP?
Yeah, so I've been working with Ron, and Ron's done a great job of keeping this all in his head and keeping it in his office, and he knows where all the needs are and what his group, he and what help he gets are capable of tackling year in and year out. And the city, you all and Dino and Ron did a great service to the city of working with TAMC to get the road funding in advance so that we could get the biggest bang for our buck on the roads. So the roads are all good. So we're in a good position, but now is a good opportunity to think about not just what are the day-to-day maintenance things, but what are some of the bigger things looming out there, 3, 4, 5 years from now, so that we can start planning for those things. So Ron and I are talking about those. He's putting together his list of where he sees the opportunities and the challenges for the next several years. And then we'll be looking at some software system. There's some free software systems. There's some relatively cheap software that can help do the calculations for you, where you plug in the projects, and then it helps you map out over the next 5 years what your funding strategy is and where that money's going to come from. So we're looking into that and see where we can come up with something to recommend to you all. If it's free, we're just going to do it because there's no point in waiting. But yeah, no, we're looking forward to sharing that all with you, and then building that into the budget process.
Great. I see a special meeting in our future, or a study session.
At least one, yeah.
Yeah. So let's go out to the public. Anybody have any questions? Offers to write grants for us? Mr. Ragsdale Cronin.
Come off me. There we go. Good evening, everyone. I just wanted to make a quick mention. John was talking about partnering with other agencies, and a prime example of that working extremely well was the regional stormwater project that MRWPCA / Monterey One Water provided a body and an office space, phones, the regular, all the support systems for the regional stormwater project, and all the cities, I believe, kicked in a small percentage of funding for that. It was when I was there, it was an exceptionally well-run organization. They got done what the state and the feds required for stormwater and runoff and all those kind of things. And also during my tenure there, I was on the building end of some grant projects. And like John said, there's no such thing as a free lunch. There's a lot of limitations. For example, we had some grant funded pump stations, and the landscaping didn't survive one of the droughts. Well, we couldn't just tear it out because it was grant funded landscaping. You had to go back and put it back the way it was. So you have to be a little careful, and you have to kind of watch your P's and Q's, but I think John's got a lot of experience at it. And if we do it the right way, I think we can get some money and do some good stuff for the city. So that's it.
Thank you. Any other public comment? I don't see everybody on my screen. Karen, do you see any?
I don't see
Okay.
any hands up.
So I'll come back. Any last comments, questions before we move on? This is a discussion item only, so there is no vote. All right, let's move on to new business. Item B, consider applications for the Clean California Grant Program. John.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Am I on mute? Yeah, okay. So normally going forward, if we actually have grant projects and grant applications, this would be something that we would put on consent. But since we're talking about grants, and this is kind of a unique one, and it does highlight some of what I was talking about, I figured I'd put it on as a discussion item. This is a fairly unique grant in a couple of ways. It has a very short turnaround time. The applications are due by February 1st. The way the grants are going to be graded is unusual. There's a very high percentage of the ranking is on the narrative and not the actual project itself, which is unique. I've never seen that before. So it's interesting, but it's the focus is on beautification projects, specifically, litter pickup, things like that. And opportunities for improving public spaces, improving, it's a Caltrans project. So if you can do any beautification along their roads, they love that. But there's a separate opportunity to work with them on that. But it's very high ranking if you serve underserved populations, which we don't. The matching requirement is kind of on a sliding scale based on some certain criteria, the biggest of which being are you serving a school or a route to a school, or are you serving an underserved population? We don't have either of those. We're looking about whether or not we can kind of ride the coattails of Seaside a little bit, especially with potential route to school for Delray Woods with next year, potentially. We'll find out later tonight whether or not our students will be going to Delray Woods beginning next year. So there may be some opportunity for that may help us position ourselves better for this type of grant. For this one right now, I think the way we rank, we're looking at probably a 50% match. So we started off looking big. The maximum grant award for this, and you can apply for multiple projects. And so on a project level, the maximum grant amount is $5 million. But now we're looking at a 50% match. So spitballing projects, we were looking at things like potentially addressing native plants in Work Memorial Park, because that's a big project. And just the environmental review and the permitting alone for that is going to be cost prohibitive for us. So we thought about that, but unless you all know donors that I don't know, we don't have $2.5 million to match a grant with if we wanted to go the full blown $5 million. Not that that would be a $5 million project, but we started off big and trying to look at everything. Ron worked with a consulting firm to do some cleanup work for us, do some landscaping, some refurbishment of some of our pathways between the neighborhoods and the routes to the school. And we came up with a project list broken out of a bunch of different projects. The total amount was $500,000. We were hoping we were going to get the grant match down, that we were going to qualify to get it down to where we could do a lot of that and apply for a lot of that. But like I said, it's looking like we're more toward the 50% match requirement. So even with that, we don't have $250,000 at our disposal for matching a project of that size. And I just don't think that we are super competitive for this grant. But it's a unique, like I said, it's a unique grant. And if we write it properly and we work on the narrative properly, we may be competitive because it is a short turnaround time for it. And, you know, how you write the grant and the narrative counts for something. So we may have opportunities there to get something out of this. We've been moving pretty quickly on this, you know, with the holiday and then coming back and then being closed with COVID. And Randy was kind of taking the lead on helping us pull all this together. And then he got COVID and went out. So we've had some hiccups along the way. So we're still putting this together. But just to give you an idea of what we're looking at, you know, we're looking at how to improve the appearance of our monuments as you're coming into the city, to clean that up, make them look nicer, give a little bit better image to the outside world as they're coming into the city and seeing the city. Doing the Rosita Triangle in front of the church. We want to do a little bit. Ron's done a really good job of cleaning that up and making it look nicer, but we can make that a little bit more of a park-like setting, and maybe improving the benches there and doing a pathway through there and some more landscaping, some trees. I know we have a couple trees there that are immature and someday they'll be great, but you know, doing something else to kind of spruce that up a little bit, doing some cleanup and work memorial in terms of cleaning up some of the trash that blows in there, and then maybe putting up something to block the trash and keep it out of there. And then cleaning up some of our pathways and other medians, and taking advantage of some of the climate change goals that they have in this grant, and you know, getting rid of some of the concrete and asphalt and rock surfaces and putting in some landscaping that doesn't reflect the heat, instead absorbs the heat and the carbon, those kinds of things. So those are the things that we're looking at. You know, we want to keep it within reason and something that we can match reasonably with what we have at our disposal. If we are successful in this, then we'll come back with a recommendation for the council to consider, and a funding strategy for the match portion for you all to consider. If we are successful in getting this, there's no requirement that you all approve the grant, accepting the grant. So you will have another opportunity to look at what we've put into the package and what our funding recommendation would be at that point. And so if it just doesn't work for the city at that point, we can still say, you know, it's not for us. But with that, if you have any questions, I can answer them.
Wonderful. So let's start with Vice Mayor Gagliotti.
No, I don't have any questions.
Okay. Pat Lintel.
No questions, thank you.
Scott Donaldson.
I don't have any questions, but I really like the projects that you mentioned. It's kind of in that sweet spot, and realizing that we have that 50% match requirement, it's kind of right there where we need it to be. One of the things that I was thinking about is maybe we get some ideas from some of the community groups here. So groups like Sustainable Delray Oaks and the Citizens Action Group, there might be some projects that those organizations have discussed that might also look and feel like the ones that have already been recommended. So that's the only thing I would throw out there. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Shirley.
Yeah, thanks, Don. With this grant, can we address any of the illegal dumping that happens in Fort Ord? Like, can we, in terms of cleanup, or would it pay for, I don't know if we need like camera systems, things like that? Would it cover things like that?
Yeah, I don't know about camera systems specifically, but that actually is cleaning up a lot of the dumping that's occurred in the former Fort Ord property. That is a large part of this proposal that Ron got. We may have to scale it back because it's expensive to go out and deal with that stuff, because a lot of it is hazmat.
Mm.
And I think Ron told me that it's, you get into the tens of thousands of dollars per day, just because we can't drive tractors back there. We can't drive big trucks. So anything that's back there has to be brought out by hand. So it's very, very labor intensive,
Yeah. Okay.
but it is something
All right.
to look at. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Sure. And then also, Mayor, if I could just respond to Councilmember Donaldson real quick.
Sure.
If we had more time, we would have loved to talk to everybody. And I forgot to mention that there will be a second funding cycle for this grant. And so if we're not successful for this one, or if we are successful for the first round and we still want to go for something in the second round, yeah, we would want to talk to several groups, talk to CAG, talk to Sustainable DRO, and also work with the Parks and Rec Committee as well.
So I was going to mention that the next activity that the Parks and Rec Committee is undertaking will be a community use and needs assessment. So that information will be going out. There will be a website survey and possibly stakeholder group meetings to review things. And so that can help feed future grants. It can also it's just really good information to have what people prioritize. I have a couple of questions. Who owns the fences on 218?
I believe those are Caltrans fences, which is
Okay.
why, as they've deteriorated and fallen down, we've cleaned them up, but we haven't replaced them.
So there was also, I saw quite a bit of inclusion of public art. Is there any way we could do something along there? I mean, it's their highway and their fences. Could we, obviously it would be a very dangerous project, but that's something that just popped up into my head as we were talking about this. I love the non-native remediation of Work Memorial and Rosita Triangle. I would love to see a line of trees to help with urban heat reduction along there. That whole kind of line of Angeles towards the garden center. It would also be beautiful as an entrance to that side of the city. There's also, as you enter into the industrial area, there's a median there that just makes me so sad every time I drive by. It's just like there's weeds and rocks, and even if we could put some, native plants that are very drought tolerant, I think that would do a lot, not only for our businesses, but also for the folks that live in the Oaks on that side. And then the other thing that pops into my mind is, we had talked about repainting the bathroom, and that could also be another public art project that I think, I don't know if Delray Oaks or CAG or the Parks and Rec would want to help take that on, but it beautifies. It's something we need to do anyway. So that's something to consider. And then the last thing that I found interesting was that, and maybe it's not for this one, but it's for the next one, is that we can partner with nonprofits. And we have the Arts Council right around the corner from us. And SDRO is a nonprofit. I don't know if CAG has theirs back yet, but that's also an opportunity to help. I don't know the nuances of the grant, but we do have neighboring nonprofits that would love to be able to contribute their talents to our city. So that was really all I had, but shall we go out to the public? Mr. Rexdale Cronin.
Hi, sorry, I just can't resist. Would there be any money in this grant process, maybe for a flagpole? It was brought up once this morning or earlier in the meeting, and I don't know if I was misquoted or whatever, but I mean, if it's for public works and things like that and beautification, maybe we could sneak a flagpole into that thing. Just a thought. That was it. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Okay, seeing none. Before we move on, any last minute comments, questions for John? Okay, not seeing any. Let's move along. Receive report on council meeting technology and safety considerations. Do I turn this over to you, John, or?
Yeah, and I'm going to turn it over to Assistant City Manager / Chief of Police, Jeff Wine.
Okay.
Thank you, boss, mayor, council. This next item is just an informational report for you guys as part of our strategic planning process in September of last year. One of the 3 goals of the strategic plan is to enhance the city's effectiveness and efficiency. And one of the strategic objectives for that was for the city manager and I to research and present to council operational strategies and technology options for safe public meetings, considering the impact of the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. Mostly this deals with technology. As we've seen in the last year, it's kind of hard to come up with strategies because COVID changes all the time, and there's new variants, and there may be new variants and new government requirements or mandates that would wipe out any planning that we already have, and we need to be flexible. So as we move farther along and get towards a decision on exactly what type of meeting we want to hold in the future to have it safe, then we can start building strategies that would be realistic for that time. So when we considered safe meetings, we first talked about what types of meetings we can have. One was to continue indefinitely with online only meetings. Second was to transfer to a hybrid in-person and online meeting format, which many public agencies are already moving towards. There are many local cities and other agencies that have already moved to that or are evolving to that type of meeting. And there has also been some talk in the legislature about mandating those types of meetings in the future coming out of the pandemic. And then, of course, return to in-person only meetings was the other option. And as we considered the impact of all those 3 types of meetings, it now or soon or sometime in the future, as the COVID impact steadies, the numbers and the types of cases decline, it appears that the hybrid in-person online meeting is probably the most realistic and probably the recommended option that staff would recommend to you folks. That is because it offers the most access, it offers the most transparency, and the highest amount of safety for not only council and staff, but the public. So people can access meetings from outside locations. If they want to come in-person meetings, they can do that. Same with council, and it takes into account health risks for each individual. Regardless of any possible future changes in government requirements in response to the pandemic, there will undoubtedly be operational impacts, though, if we did go to a hybrid meeting. Some of those, for example, are if there are requirements to have vaccinations, who would be checking to make sure that folks attending the in-person meetings would be properly vaccinated, making sure that people had masks on, making sure if there were distancing requirements. So that would take 1 staff member. And of course, we get people coming in and out of meetings throughout the entire meeting. So that would probably have to be a dedicated staff member. As we've talked about before, with our small staff, that may require having to hire a police officer on overtime or something like that because our administrative staff is so small. Second, another impact with staffing would be we would most likely have to have 2 administrative staff members running the meeting, 1 for the technology and the online portion of the meeting, and then 1 staff member running the in-person meeting, taking notes, timers, things like that, working the technology that is in the council chambers. So it will be a little more staff intensive. Right now, when we have to and in a crunch, we can run an online only meeting with 1 staff person. However, if we did it hybrid, it would most likely take 2 or more staff members to do that. And other things that you may be have to think about are disinfecting after every meeting, and would we hire our cleaning company or somebody who can do that to make sure that after the meetings, the council chambers and the equipment were disinfected. Those are some of the impacts that it'll have on staff. When we looked at costs of the equipment, and we're still looking at some of those, the range of costs are right around the $9,000 to $10,000 range for the equipment. We've gotten a few quotes from vendors, and we just received one after this packet was put together that we will probably get to you for your information. That was put together by our IT person, Yavuz, and it is a few $1,000s cheaper, and he has some very good technology suggestions on how to do that the meetings hybrid moving forward, that will give you more information about. We continue to reach out to other agencies, and we will probably reach out to other vendors to try and get those costs as low as we can and see the most efficient way to run those meetings through other jurisdictions. They may have addressed some of these issues that we already talked about, staffing and disinfecting and things and so forth. And we hope to come back to you in the near future with our recommendations on what type of meetings or the impacts of all those types of meetings for your recommendation and direction to staff. And be glad to answer any questions.
All right, thank you for that. Let's start with Vice Mayor Gagliotti.
No questions. I'm good.
Pat Lintel, Ms. Lintel.
Thanks, Jeff. I have no questions. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Donaldson.
I have no questions, but I like where you're going with this. I like the recommendation for the hybrid meetings. And I think it's something that we should move towards quickly to at least have it in place. You know, there's just a lot of benefits to doing in person. I kind of equate it to having school in person. There's a lot of inherent benefits, and I think having that capability is really key. And then, you know, once we do have that capability in place, we can use statistics from the county health department to determine whether we can or cannot meet in person. But I think it's very important that we have that capability and we start moving towards it sooner rather than later. And just overall, Jeff, I like your approach and I like your recommendation. Thanks.
Ms. Shirley.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. I do agree that moving in a hybrid, fashion would be beneficial for access to our meetings. I'm not sure if we should do it right away because, I think we need to think about everyone's health, obviously. So we want to be careful with it, but I like the fact that you're looking at it now so that we can be ready to go when we do it. So thank you.
Thanks. So I have family members that are sensitive. And so I too, and I went to a hybrid meeting the other day that was horribly managed. Especially since we have action minutes, I want to make sure that whatever technology we have ensures that everyone can be heard. And this meeting I went to, there were technology issues with people that were in person and people on Zoom, and it was painful. So perhaps we could get it up and running and then test it for a couple of months. But I just read today they're anticipating yet again another variant. And I personally am not interested in being in person and exposing myself to viruses that cause breakthroughs. It's not an option for me and the people that I love. So on that, let's go out. I'm really interested to hear what the public has to say on this. Any public comment? Mr. Ragsdale Cronin.
Well, I seem to be on a roll tonight. While we're looking at technology, that's all great and good, but we also need to look at the physical aspects of the meeting space. The HVAC, the air changes per hour, the air filtration, how we can manage some physical separation while in those rooms, while both being in the room and while accessing ingress and egress of the room, because there's only the one door in and out that I recall. So you could have kind of a bottleneck right there. So, I think there's got to be a physical aspect beyond the technology aspect that we need to look at. I believe the recommendations on air changes are about 4 to 6 air changes per hour, which is a fairly substantial amount of air movement. So you've got to make sure it gets done, and you got to make sure it's quiet because you're trying to have a meeting with people talking. So, we're going to probably have to take a look at a good air quality consultant, HVAC consultant. I know a few of them around here that I've worked with at the school that are very good at it. But that's another aspect of this whole thing, that we did a lot of technology at school. We did a lot of HVAC improvements at school to make it safe for the students there. And we've been relatively successful. We had a bit of a dust up last month, or a couple of weeks ago. We had a little spike. It wasn't terrible, but it was coming off of the Christmas vacation, or the winter break, whatever you want to call it. So we had a little spike in cases, but none of them were horrible. Most were asymptomatic, but we do test every week. So we catch a lot of stuff that maybe other areas won't. So just a recommendation, we should basically look at the physical aspects of it too, not just the technology. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. We are looking at a new HVAC system as a possible purchase from our ARPA funds. Mr. Krieger.
Yeah, thanks. I'll back up what Bill's saying. It's still out there. Our school, we had a pretty big spike a couple weeks ago. They're still popping a couple every day. With 2 more positive notices students today. So it's still out there, but it's going to pass, and it's going to, we'll get by it. What I was thinking about was we talked about the space limitations. Clearly a night like tonight would not be an issue, but in the past, we all know there have been council meetings where, it was overflowing out into the foyer. So, we just need to make sure that there's already something in place, or it's could get kind of heated about who gets in, who doesn't get in, because obviously there will be nights when not everybody would get in a hybrid. And I think a hybrid's a great idea if you can work out the technology. The one thing I would mention about, because I have set up site in the foyer more than a couple of times, we need speakers out there. The speakers work over by the police window, but they do not work by the door. And so I used to always have to walk around and stand by the police, on the police window side, and the speakers work just fine. But as soon as you move around to the front, so just something to keep in mind, along with all the other minor technical issues of implementing something like this. Just the issue of where you put the people, the overflow people, and making sure they can hear. Maybe put a TV up out there so they can see as well. That was the other thing. It was spent all the time like poking through the window, trying to through the door, just trying to see what was going on. So add it to the list of things to think about. But I do appreciate the hybrid. I think it will, and I've loved how many people have been coming to council meetings the last 2 years, and it's a lot more involvement. I see a lot of people that I never saw before in person. So hopefully we can keep that engagement up. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. We have some other public that I would love to encourage you to share with us your thoughts on this. Okay. Let's come back to the council. Again, any last minute comments before we move on to our last new business item?
No.
Okay. So last item is consider council policies for committees. Mr. Gerton.
I almost made it through the whole meeting without forgetting to unmute myself.
Congratulations.
I blew it on the last one. So some of this came up with during the discussion on the police advisory committee. We have committees in the city that are envisioned in our ordinance. The guidance in the ordinance is one sentence that says that we shall have these committees and the mayor shall appoint 3 members each to the committees. And that's it. That's the only guidance we have for the committees. Because they're contemplated in the ordinance and set by ordinance, they are Brown Act committees. They have occasionally, not so much, been treated as Brown Act committees. So we're going to follow the Brown Act and in all aspects of the Brown Act, as we just heard from the city attorney earlier today. And we're going to make those committees regular standing committees and treat them as such. It'll be a process, but I think that we all in this meeting right now and the community would benefit from having some clear guidance on what the expectations of these committees are. I think they would benefit from understanding what their mission is as the council sees it, and what you all are looking from them, and from an advisory capacity. It'd be helpful for staff in how we're going to interact with the committees and the commissions, and better support them, and how, what they can expect from staff, and in terms of support and communication and resources for their work, and then how we all can move forward on moving the city forward through their assistance with staff and with the council. It's fairly common among cities to have council priorities established for committees to provide some guidance on things like classification of what the committees are, and what's the difference between a commission and a committee, and what's the level of expectation, and then what the level of authority is. Like a commission, the planning commission actually has the authority to make decisions and to authorize permits and things like that. Committees typically don't have that type of authority. They're more advisory, either working in an advisory capacity for the council or for staff. So clarifying all of that, clarifying things like regularly scheduled meeting times and dates. That's a requirement under the Brown Act. So we want to follow that. But beyond just a Brown Act requirement, it helps the community know when a committee is going to meet and have it on their calendar or have it in their mind as a regular time, so they know when to engage with the work of that committee. It helps staff so that we can plan our calendar and plan when we're going to bring items to the committees to work with them on those things, and keeps it in front of us so that we're not scrambling to do these things on an ad hoc basis. And then it also helps you all so that you have an expectation of when you should be hearing from those committees or from staff on the work that's going on in those committees and what kind of items those committees are working on. So we've already done that with the Parks Committee, establishing, Karen, correct me if I'm wrong because my memory, but I think it's the first Wednesday of the month.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, first Wednesday of the month.
Yeah.
And then the Finance Committee was the third Friday of the month. Is that right?
I think it's the second.
Fourth.
Yeah.
Second Friday? Okay.
Second Friday.
Yeah. So you can see how new it is because I can't even remember. But I think it's good for everyone to have clarification for that. So really the purpose of this was just to let you all know that that's one of those, again, foundational things that we're working on. But because it's a policy, it would be establishing a policy. I wanted to bring it to you all, get your input on it, and more importantly, kind of, get your consensus that, yeah, this is a direction that we want to go, because then I want to go and the staff want to go and work with the chairs of each of those committees and commission on what do they see working, what isn't working, what are the expectations, and how is this going to work for them also, so that they have some say in the formulation of the policies. So with that, I'll leave available for questions.
Great. Thank you so much for this. Vice Mayor Gagliotti.
Yeah, no, I don't have any, input to this. I'll be looking forward to seeing what you come up with. I absolutely, I've been on a number of these committees and yeah, you usually spend the first couple of meetings just figuring what the hell what the heck you gotta be doing. So I'm glad this is being focused. Thanks.
Ms. Lintel. You're muted. Karen, can you help her? There you go.
There you go.
No, okay. I have no questions, but thank you very much, John.
Okay, Mr. Donaldson?
Yeah, I don't have any questions, but John, I wanted to tell you that I do like your approach and, the way you're going about this. So, that piece of it, thumbs up. I think, keep moving in that direction.
Ms. Shirley?
Yeah, thanks, John. I think having additional policies are important because we don't want to be just making things up as we go. So I think the guidance, for us going forward in the future would be fabulous. So thanks. I appreciate your work on that.
I just want to say that we are fortunate to have so many residents that want to dedicate their time and talents to help our city be better. And I think it's up to us to help them be the best public servants they can. And I think if you have a structure going into something, and you get to play with that and understand that, then you can focus on the real work that needs to be done rather than figuring out, when you're going to meet and, all that kind of stuff. So this, I have over the years written guidance like this, thinking that our committees need it. And I'm thrilled that you're taking this on to help our volunteers help us and help the city. So let's go out to the public. Any comments on the committees and commission discussion? I am not seeing any. Last chance. All right, so let's come back to the council. Any last ideas, comments? All right, this is going fast. So let's move on to staff reports and I'll turn it over to the city manager.
Okay, well, I provided my written city manager's report. And so if anybody wants to see details, that's the details of where we've been. It's been kind of a condensed month with the holidays and then COVID and all the fun stuff stemming from that. As I mentioned at the last council meeting, that was a gift from one of our sister agencies. So they owe us. So it's been busy and yet slow at the same time. So it's been kind of a weird month. But my only other thing that I want to point out for you all specifically is that starting the evening of February 2nd through the 4th, I will be attending the city managers conference. We're fortunate that it's going to be in Monterey this year, so I don't have to travel. So I will be attending that, and I can still be in and out of the office as necessary and as time permits, and obviously available to you all and the staff by phone if things pop up. But otherwise, I will try to make the best of my time at that conference, and I will be sure to share what I learn when I come back.
Great. I'm so glad it's here and that you can attend. Council reports are in the packet, as are the correspondence items. It says we're adjourned, but actually we're going to a closed session. So what I'd like to do is see if there's any public comment on either of the closed session items. Conference with legal counsel, anticipated litigation, or conference with legal counsel, existing litigation. Any public comment on any of those closed session items? I'm seeing no hands. You are welcome to stay as the council moves into closed session and discusses these things. We will come out and report out any conclusions if you do choose to leave. Our next regular meeting is the fourth Tuesday of February, February 22nd. Oh, 2/22/22, but at 6 o'clock. So on that, if we could be moved over to our closed session item, and if you leave, we'll see you next month. Are we all here? Did Pat make it? There she is.
Oh, there she is.
So, City Attorney Lorca, could you please report out from the closed session?
Sure. Madam Mayor, the council met with respect to the two items, anticipated litigation and Michelle Ball versus City of Delray Oaks et al. Status update was provided to council, direction was provided, but no reportable action was taken.
All right, thank you very much. On that, our next meeting date is again 2/22/2022 at 6 o'clock. That's fun to say. On that, we're adjourned. Ding.
Thank you all. Good night.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks, John.